I think this is one of the first, well, I call them real poems. I'd written many things before, which I don't have around now. One day I went out and burnt them all my juvenilia. But one of the poems that I thought looked recognizably like a poem and kept was this one, which begins with this 3-line poem by Multiton, which he wrote after, I'm not sure whether it was I think it was his first wife. They were captured by the Kuomintang, and she was pregnant, and they garroted her, they killed her, and he could hear her being killed. And I don't know whether they let him go or whether, I think he escaped. It's a long time ago, so I can't remember what I knew of it then. But his begins and ends in mine. I cut my hands on the cords at the strangling post, but no blood spilled from my veins. Instead of blood, I watched and saw the pity run out of me. She was destroyed, and my child ceased in her belly. In Kiangsi we had walked in the clear morning, she hanging back, barefoot, child-big. Crossing the plank bridge, I saw the falling mountain with its stream hang still. The land lay like a bowl of pebbles, hills behind me at its rim. A hawk splayed in the wind, dived to kill. So sparrows die. China was patience, you said, the sketched lines of valley, of the reaching twig, all still, rest in motion. A large pale flower twitching, a flower waiting open. So a vast land itched for death, its people mild and ministered. But the cockroach and the grinning toad drawn beautiful was China, the fly grown fat on flesh, glittering in heat. I was lashed and drained of the gentle passion. Patience was prized from me. I picked lice from my hair. You thought me gentle still. I ate filth, wore it, would have died in filth. The horned and hanging bat sees a bat's world. Fish quiver in the shallows, cold as their element, thinking water. I wore contempt, grew hatred. I was locked and jailed. She that was my wife was garroted, and compassion had not anything to do with this. She was destroyed where I could hear, and the child ceased in her. Compassion cannot go forever in the sun, paraded, bowing, twig-like. It rests, and somewhere takes the hawk's wing, diving. She was destroyed, and my child ceased. I cut my hands on the cords at the strangling post, but no blood spilled from my veins. Instead of blood, I watched and saw the pity run out of me. I think I learned in America to use my voice and to use its range and its register. And in any case, I mean, I write them to be read aloud. I think quite often when I'm writing, I have a sort of my own voice in my ear, and I'm testing what it would sound like, and then at a certain point when the poem seems to be almost there, I'll step back and read it aloud and tape it and listen to it and check it on the air, and ultimately check it with an audience when I do a reading, because until that happens I haven't really figured out whether the poem works or not. So it's really a matter of checking it out with other people, with an audience. I guess what I'm saying is that I write neither for the page nor for the ear. I mean, I'm not a performance poet either. I think it's a complete process where you use your eye and your ear and your voice and all of it. I think with English poetry, too much of it is just written for the page. It's written to go into a book. It's written to be read in a library, in silence, in solitude, as personal communication. All of which is quite valid, and I do that too. But I also like the idea of communicating with audiences and of using the voice, really.
Are there any poems that you that you can think of that you might like to read now that you especially like reading when you have an audience there?
All of them.
All of them. You don't have any special favourites? Always do the reading.
I usually start with one. There's one I usually begin with. because it sort of tells me where I'm going. It's usually the one I begin with because it's sort of like self-definition. Lives ago, years past, generations, perhaps nowhere, I dreamed it. The foggy ploughland of wind and hoofprints, my father off in the mist topping beats. Where I was 8, I knew nothing. The world a cold winter light on half a dozen fields, then all the winking blether of stars. Before, like a fool, I began explaining the key in its lost, locked box, adding words to the sum that never works out. Where I was, distracted again by the lapwing, the damp morning air of my father's gregarious plain chant cursing all that his masters deserved and had paid for. Sure I was, then, for the world's mere being in the white rime on weeds among the wet hawthorn berries at the field's edge darkened by frost, and none of these damned words to say it. I began trailing out there in voices, friends, women, my children, my father's tetherless anger, some like him who are dead, who are part of the rain now.
You've got there's another rather touching poem. I think it's called My Father Fading Out.
Fading Out, I'm just thinking about that one, yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is really an evocation of him. There it is. Because he worked pretty hard, and he'd come. And I'd remember he'd come in and have his supper, and he'd probably listen to the radio a bit because this was before the days of TV. And then he'd fall asleep by the fire. There are probably various things in this that will not be very familiar, but it's got frozen turnips in it, so that's nearly the same as the beets. What it has in the end is he looks into the fire and he sees the black flag of a stranger. And I recall that this was some superstition that when you burn coal, it's sometimes sort of an oil bitumen comes out of it, and it forms this sort of black flap that waves around in the draft. And that always meant that a stranger was going to knock at the door. So it's called a stranger for that reason. My father fading out. Each time I recall him, he's grown thinner and paler. Am I making myself clear? He shouts from the hearthstone. Already I see almost through him, asleep at the fire, exhausted evening by evening, his crossed feet pink and opaque at the open oven door. If he slams out now, it will be fainter and shake the house less curled to his lip for his bosses, Reggie Rat, Charlie Woods, Wallace Dixon. For them he went, topping and tailing, bent through the frozen turnips, or stucking in summer pitched his fork high in the air in blind sudden anger. Now he fades out. The wireless plays him to sleep. He wakes, asks news, sees in the coals the black flag of a stranger, dozes again, then is gone completely.
You've also, you've written, you seem to have, there seem to be two lines in your poems. There's the very personal poems about you and your personal feelings and situation, and then there are the poems that you write about other personae, other people, and you've actually written a series of poems using a persona, the John Hawkwood poem.
That's one of them. That's one of my personae, one of my masks. So John Hawkwood was a historic personality who was born near Colchester in Essex, and who he went off to be a soldier, it is thought. Not much is known in the early part. When his father died, his father left him, because he had an older brother who inherited the manor house. But he was left his father's best horse, £20 and a year at his brother's expense, i.e. a year to decide what he was going to do with his life. And apparently he went off to London to apprentice himself to a tailor. But he then turns up at Agincourt, and then he's a sir, so he was knighted in the field for valour. And when this section of what later was called the 100 Years' War was over. At some point, England and France made a peace, and they just left the armies in the field, which meant that thousands and thousands of armed men were left in France. And what were they going to do? They were going to rape, plunder, pillage, and generally make a bloody nuisance of themselves, which they did. And they went down the Rhone. Some were distracted into Spain, some went to fight in Austria. And some turned up in Italy, where there was ripe pickings for soldiers, and Hawkwood then spent the rest of his life as a mercenary captain, fighting for various states, but in the end mostly for Florence. And the chapter that I read about him struck me that there was something familiar about this man. That there was he reminded me of the old soldier who's been through the wars and somehow comes out human at the end, who's seen everything and seems to have acquired some wisdom through it. And he had a fairly strong integrity. He would sign it. He was a condottiere, which means in fact a contractor. It's a contract that you draw up, and he would have these very elaborate contracts which he would honour to the letter. They always included a clause that he would undertake no action against the King of England, whom he regarded as his lord. And he seems to have spent as much energy and time avoiding conflict and battle as actually getting involved in it, And I think it suited him to spend most of his years actually working for Florence, which was certainly not at that time, an expansionist state. It was merely interested in defensive warfare. So it was really this character and the character of this man that struck me. I'll read you a bit of it. This is 2 sections of a 20-section poem. This, incidentally, I imagine him keeping this private diary that he shows no one, and so that I'm really trying to write the sort of private papers, the private thoughts of a public man. All this I do is my dream work, late and unwilling, the watch posted alert, rattle of irons, long death cry of some creature caught in the hedgeback alone, stars and the moon's pale face over all. My heart goes away, flying north to the snowy passes she will die in. Night by night she is fainter, further and colder, her voice in the star maze at the far range of my hearing, where I, working late and close to the page, draw up the sketch for a medallion, my heart between a falcon's claws, my name Acuto, and the versant writ, what am I but a vicious labourer, the iron grub that kills for pay? What I am now, so you will be, what you are now, so I was once. Acuto, because his name was Hawkwood, and apparently the Italians can't say Hawkwood too easily, so one of his names was Acuto, which means sharp, and he was pretty sharp in his dealings. And then other names that he has, which are in this other part that I'll read. Augusto, which is Augustus, and one that I invented for him called Giovanni Hawkwood. Hawkwood. Awake and sweating in my flesh, my heart gone off without my leave, perhaps for better pay elsewhere. Or she must beg her way through warring neighbourhoods alone, and like me, sell her only skin, or limp a penitent to Rome, whose bishop is one of 2 great lechers, and I but one of his butchers. Between the birth stool and the planks, between the slippery dialects, Auti, Augusto, Giovanni Hawkwood, sharpen your good blade, shine in your beaten armour, get horse and a good ship ready, and go home. I'm going to read you Katya's message, which came out of a workshop we did in Berlin in May '89. Before the wall came down, but the workshop ended with everyone writing down something and putting it in an envelope and taking it away. The instruction being that you open this envelope somewhat later, weeks later perhaps. I think a couple of weeks later I opened the envelope, and Katya had written, "This sentence has no meaning, but what are you going to do about the crocodiles?" So that was sufficient of a challenge. Yes, what am I going to do with a sentence that has no meaning and got crocodiles in it? In Berlin, attempting sleep, this sentence without meaning keeping me awake. One by one, the hours climb the clock, labor as slowly down the other side. The silence at the border is absolute, full of watching darkness, wire and neon, the dark trees either side without wind or weather or the baying of dogs. It goes on, the silence, a lake without a name where legends surface, a beat of air, a log of wood, a skin, an eye blinked open in the dark. It is the crocodile, easing down into another sleepless night along the border, here beside the wall, where still this sentence has no